Hi guys, welcome back to Lunatic Astrology. I'm your astrologer, Lori Lothy, and today we're with the Patreon community on Astro Tarot Tuesday. And we've got some amazing astrologers who wish to dive into the possibility of looking at the COVID pandemic over the next year, 2021, from the perspective of February 23rd, 2021, to see what might occur given our best estimates on the astrology of pandemics. And at the time of this recording, in the continental Canada and US, North America, even the world, the pandemic seems to be ebbing dramatically at this time. So vaccines are rolling out. Just for historical record, the pandemic seems to be also retracing its steps on its own accord, as waves do. So there's those two variables to consider. And we're just going to have fun. So I am going to introduce the astrologers that are here today and have them say a little bit about themselves, and then we'll begin the discussion itself. So I'm going to ask in this order, Kate, Omar, and Dan to just give us a little bit about yourself and where you come from in the astrology community. And just go ahead, Kate, and start.
Awesome. Thank you so much. My name is Kate Wind, and I am based in Las Vegas, Nevada. I am a second generation astrologer, and I've been running my own practice now for 4 years. So thank you for having me. I'm excited to chime in on some thoughts.
Thank you. And you're in Las Vegas, you said? Or
Yes.
you are, right?
Yeah.
Hey, Omar.
Hey, Lori, thank you for having me. My name is Omar Senior. I'm based out of New York City. I've been studying astrology for about 15 years, since I was 19. My goal really with astrology is to sort of use it for its practical applications and really to teach it to as many people as I can, sort of evangelize it. But yeah, I'm happy to be here and happy to take part in the discussion, and pleasure to meet all of you.
Oh, I love the idea of that, evangelical for astrology. Yeah. All righty. Hey, Dan, come on in and share a bit about where you're at and who you are.
Hey, yeah, I'm Dan. I'm based out of Vancouver Island in the West Coast, Canada. I met Lori in a Hellenistic astrology class from Nightlight Astrology. And that's primarily the style that I go for, is traditional Hellenistic astrology. I'm fairly new at this though. I've only, it was 2017 that I had this impulse, it was the right time to just dive in and learn astrology. So I've only got a few years of getting into this, but I'm kind of diving in pretty strongly now.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The reason that I handpicked him from our class of 40 people is I think he's a mad genius of astrology. You don't need to study a long time, Dan. You just have a natural spark of knowing about it. So you were fun to be a student with. So here we're going to go into the discussion of the pandemic, and I will leave time for Trish and T and Dawn and Carrie for your questions, and also because a lot of you are intuitives yourself professionally as well. Any questions you might have, or thoughts you might have on what we say, in your own intuition using your own style. Okay, so I'm just going to say a couple of things about looking at pandemics in general. In the modern world, I think we kind of don't have a lot of ways to see pandemics. It's not like we've been studying them astrologically for years. And one of the best things I've ever discovered about pandemic astrology is to look at the history of transits in other pandemics. And so a lot of us astrologers know that there has been the occurrence of pandemics during certain kinds of transits. And so you can go back to the Black Plague and look at the transits with Pluto and with Saturn, those are kind of standard fare during the Black Plague of the 1300s. And we all kind of, in Capricorn, I should say, and we all kind of wondered astrologically what kind of bad calamity, even plague, might befall us, in 2021, as Pluto was meeting in the sky with Saturn. And that was kind of a bit of an omen to begin with as we began 2020. For me, one of the best things I've ever discovered is Babylonian astrology, and next to Hellenistic, because it really looks at what happens in the sky. And it's talking about the sky as a living story maker. And, an invisible planet is a dead planet or a useless planet or out to lunch planet in terms of effectiveness, good or bad. A malefic invisible is a good thing. A benefic like Jupiter, it may not be so great. So one of the people I studied with, his name is Ruman, had this idea at the very onset of the pandemic that this was a Mars-related phenomena. And I remember listening to him, and I studied with him in 2 courses since then. So we're talking about me learning about him in March of 2019. His name is Ruman, a Babylonian astrologer. He talks about Mars having the greatest influence over plagues in the ancient world. Mars was considered the god of plagues, and modern astrologers weren't looking at Mars primarily. They were looking at, certainly they were looking at Pluto and Saturn, and then Jupiter as well this year, tracking the wave, but they weren't looking at Mars, such a rudimentary planet. Anyway, so Mars is a malefic. He is associated in ancient tradition with plagues, and he was rising in his heliacal rising in the fall of 2019. Now, October of 2019, heliacal meaning coming up from the beams of the sun to be reborn, his rising from the beams of the sun, which he does every 2 years. And at the time, he did rise against a very daunting malefic star called Corvus, or the raven or the crow, which can be an omen in itself. That was just enough to make people bite their nails, who are Babylonian astrologers particularly. But also in their tradition, there is a system of time lords that has to do with dividing the zodiacal wheel into 2.5-degree increments. And there's other traditions that do that as well, but this is one of theirs. And in the case of the time that we're in, let's put it that way, where the actual sidereal zodiac is showing itself in the sky. Oh yeah, let's do it this way. Let's all mute ourselves so that when I'm talking, my face is on, and then I'll mute, and so just so we don't flip faces. And so the sidereal zodiac is literally the literal sky above us, which Babylonian astrologers use, as opposed to the tropical, which is symbolic. But the point is that in the sidereal or literal sky, the spring equinox is entered into a 2.5-degree subdivision, which corresponds to 170 years, that is run by Mars. Mars, the god of plagues, Mars, the malefic, Mars, sort of the daunting bad guy. Although you could say he also is the gardener who hard prunes the rose bush, right, and cuts out all the dead wood. So this happened in 2016, where Mars was now the lord of this planet for the next 170 years. We're under his lordship. Just think about that. Then he rises in a malefic star, heliacally, in the sign of sidereal Virgo, the god of health, goddess of health, tropical Libra, which isn't great either, in debility. And he incites a plague. I mean, because COVID was spreading in Wuhan and China in the actual October, November, December, before it became a public declared epidemic and then a pandemic. In that sense, Mars, the hope I have, I'm just making this very simple. I'll go into more detail later after I let other people consider their thoughts. The hope I have is that Mars kind of peaked out in October or the fall of 2021 when he was directly opposite the sun from his rising. So that's kind of like the high noon for Mars of his journey from his birth, that birthed the pandemic. And so the peaking in the fall of the pandemic is kind of like hopefully one of the thoughts that there is about that. But more hopefully, Mars will be invisible, like from June, okay, all the way through to his next heliacal rise in the fall of 2021. Actually, in this case, December 21st, 2021, when he's visible in the sky again. So it's hopeful to me that with Mars invisible in the sky after July under the beams of the sun, that this is where the pandemic begins to wane. My only concern is he's invisible. Does that mean he's just not visible in his naughty nastiness? And that when he rises again, we could have a reoccurrence of, say, a new mutation or strain. But I think in the shorter term, things will look like we're all breathing a sigh of relief, I feel, July onward. Last thing is, when the pandemic was waving up again in its second wave, starting in the summer, like, depends on where you live, but when we were calling it the second wave, the asteroid Pan for pandemic was traveling with Mars. And Mars was in Aries, his home sign. How long? 6 months. You know, like the end of June to the beginning of January 6, 2021, Mars, the god of plagues, in his own sign for 6 months, hasn't happened since 1988. And then the asteroid Pan was traveling right beside him, which doesn't happen that often. Pan all asteroids in the asteroid belt take 4 to 6 years to go around the zodiac. And then Mars takes 2 years to do it. So they just happen to track with each other, pandemic, pandemonium, panic, at the time that we were increasing in cases, increasing around all the way up to Thanksgiving in the US, and creating this second wave. Which began in the late summer of 2021. 2020. So yeah, so that's my thought. I think Mars is the culprit. I think we're in for an ebbing that's going to happen one way or the other. And I feel more optimistic in the short term, and I'm a little bit wary in the long term. And I will pass the baton to Kate, and then Omar, and then Dan, because that's how I see you guys.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I do agree. I think Mars was overlooked, and a lot of astrologers, as we were kind of predicting out 2020, were very concerned more so about the Saturn Pluto aspect that we saw. And so obviously we all lived through 2020. We know what happened, but we were kind of watching that Jupiter, those Jupiter-Pluto conjunctions happening, kind of setting off some of these higher peaks that we saw. And I do a lot of work with Sabian symbols, and it was just interesting because the degree that they were meeting at was all about a woman entering a convent. And what did we all do? We all retreated into our homes. We went back to basics. We started baking bread. We started hanging out with the family more, right? And we eliminated a lot of those outside influences. You know, like we weren't at the bars anymore. We didn't have all this entertainment. We really had to go within. I think a lot of people had some aha moments about, what do I want to do? What am I passionate about? Am I happy in this relationship? Right. So we saw that all throughout 2020. So I think it's interesting to look back 1981, 1982, the last time that we saw this Pluto-Saturn conjunction, obviously in a different sign, it was in Libra. But at that point, we weren't talking about masks on our face, but we were talking about condoms, right, on our genitals, about spreading AIDS. And so AIDS is still around, but we are more knowledgeable about it, right? And we still use condoms. I do think we will still go forward using masks. I think it brought a great awareness about, I'm going to just speak more directly to the United States culture, but you know, in the United States, it's cool to go to work sick because that means you're a hard worker. That means that, you know, you really support the team. I do think we will take a lot of knowledge that we learned in 2020 about wearing a mask, about taking more time off. I think that there'll be more knowledge that comes up about how it's spread. Again, when we think about AIDS right here, but now we know how we contract it. We know what the treatment looks like. There's a lot more language behind it, not just kind of, you know, even in 2020, we didn't know, can you get it from touching groceries? We didn't know, right? We were all sanitizing groceries there for a while. And then it came out, okay, maybe we don't have to go to those extremes. So I do think it will still be a conversation, but I think there'll be a lot more knowledge around it. And I think to make some predictions about it, I want to look at the Sabian symbol of the 0 degrees Aquarius, where we had the great conjunction on December 21st. And there's a lot of stuff in there that we're already seeing, especially playing out with these Saturn-Uranus squares. This first one we already saw on February 17th, which just fascinating to talk about that. I know that's not today's conversation, but when we look at that 0 degrees Aquarius, there's a lot of information in that degree about DNA and about neurology. And so I would be curious if we're starting to see some maybe long-term effects, whether that's from COVID or unfortunately, possibly the vaccine, I would hope not, but that how it's affecting us maybe on a more neurological standpoint than just kind of how it's been passed as, oh, it's just a cold, we will get over it and move on. So maybe what those long-term side effects look like.
This made me wonder. I'm just Googling as we go. Maybe I'll get a Tiana on it. To someone check the Sabian symbol of the Cazimi of Mars and the heart of the sun in the 2021 fall, because that's when he stops the old cycle. And I wasn't thinking of Sabian symbols, but that's brilliant, Kate, because, you know, where he meets with the sun and the heart of the sun, whether he's going to be malefic coming out or not, could be portending one way or the other, because that's his reset button for when he started the plague. So if someone wants to check Cazimi, Mars, heart of the sun, and then we can look at the Sabian. I have a Sabian book handy, or someone might also have one. That's a really great way of seeing, sort of like, you know how when I was a kid in the choir, the choir mistress would hit the pitch pipe, beep, 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 you know, to get us all on pitch. And I can't sing, so it didn't work for me. But the idea is that, those Sabian symbols, like something like a Kazemi, really set the pitch for the whole meaning of the rebirth of a planet. That's a whole beautiful way of looking
The
at it.
Sabian symbol, fascinating when you start looking at them and just seeing everything start playing out. Like I said, we're seeing a lot of it already playing out in just some of the other themes. It's a 20-year energy we've entered, but it's always going to be the strongest, especially this first year.
Yeah, and for anyone who listens who doesn't know what a Sabian symbol is, a Sabian symbol is one of 360 degrees of the zodiac, each having a channeled kind of Zen koan, a little phrase that was relevant to that. And one of the things I find about the Sabian symbols is that you can often sit with them like you would just meditate and sit with something for your own self, but sometimes they're blatantly literal. Like my moon is on the Sabian symbol, the crystal ball gazer, in the house of divination and prophecy, like the house of the goddess, which, oracles do their thing there. So you can't make that stuff up, because I've been a psychic all my life. I started doing palm reading when I was like 10, so this kind of thing makes me laugh.
That last conjunction in 2020, and I'm going to flip-flop out up, was 22 or 24. It was the week of our election, was a general steps down. And it was literally based on that I was thinking, okay, Trump's not going to win. A general steps down. Like, that was the Sabian symbol that hit off that week of the election. So.
Oh, that's great. And so what was the Sabian symbol based on that election, the election day transit? What were you looking at?
I was looking at the last Pluto-Jupiter conjunction that happened the week of our election.
Okay. Oh my God.
The degree that it sat at. It was 22 or 24 Capricorn.
Brilliant. Oh my God, I love that. What a great new tool for our astrology toolbox. Thank you for that, Kate. I agree with everything you said. Hey, Omar, what do you want to pop in and talk about? Share with us what you think about this whole darn pandemic and astrology.
Yeah, sure. So what I've been sort of tracking is, and let me know if you can hear me okay. What I've been tracking is the movement of Jupiter and Saturn, specifically in Aquarius. And, when Jupiter and Saturn were conjunct at their, December 21st, really you start to see this kick off with regards to advancement in the vaccine and different technologies and sort of ways to attack the virus. And, we're seeing that that overall arc happen. But what I'm noticing is that towards the end of May or so, Saturn goes retrograde, right? And then shortly after that, so does Jupiter about 4 or 5 weeks later. So they're both now retrograding. Well, Jupiter will ingress and then regress from Pisces into Aquarius. So what I'm thinking is that around that time, there'll be a renewed focus on how we work with the pandemic, and maybe new vaccines will come out and will be more available to everyone. Because the rollout has been a little bit shaky now in the US. So there's going to be a refocus of how we attack the vaccine. And, following that transit with both Jupiter and Saturn, those planets will remain in retrograde until about early October, where Saturn goes direct. And then shortly after that, Jupiter goes direct again. So I'm thinking there will be, if not a second wave, but maybe a newer variant of the pandemic that resurfaces during the retrograde period. And then, all those things that we've learned from the vaccine rollout will then put into implementation towards the end of October, November, and really start to take on this virus and start actually winning battles against it. So I think there is going to be a resurgence of, if not cases, but a renewed look on how we approach the vaccine, or how we approach, solving for the crisis in general. And then in October, we'll actually get a grip on it, and then we'll actually start moving forward with, suppressing the surges. So I'm really looking at Jupiter and Saturn in Aquarius, because those have been the themes of this year, specifically since towards the end of last year into this year. And their focus in that sign of Aquarius means, knowledge, technology. And it's going to be extremely important to have a focus on knowledge and technology as we battle the vaccine. So that's what I'm kind of focusing on now, and sort of watching those two movements of those planets specifically.
Yeah, I want to say that May 23rd is when Saturn retrogrades. And to me, it seems like we'll probably think things are really under control and Saturn will back up and go not so quickly. Because one of the things I was pondering was Saturn in air, right? Fear of air, not so quickly. And I'm also speculating that Jupiter bounding into, Pisces, like, whoa, all is well, everything's great. I'm in the 1st and 2nd degree of my home sign. It's almost like a home run. And that's happening, right? In when he ingresses in there during the summer. And then he's going to back out. He's going to go, no, something's wrong.
And that's sort of the way I've been sort of following it too. Jupiter moves faster than Saturn, right? Mm-hmm. So while they started off at the same place, let's call it the starting line, Jupiter takes off. Saturn, moving slower, kind of is there to clean up the mess that Jupiter makes. Jupiter wants to expand and grow and move and quick, and Saturn's there to clean it up. And then right when Jupiter moves into his home sign and like he's free at last, Saturn's like, no, let's back up. Let's retrace our steps. Let's clean up some of this mess with the rollout of the vaccine and the pandemic. And like, let's tidy this up a bit before we move direct and go into the rest of the year. So that's sort of how I've seen it. Saturn's cleaning up the mess a bit left behind by Jupiter. So
I agree with that. And, Jupiter rules air travel, right? And so one of the things about that could be literal, very literal, like Jupiter goes into Pisces around May 13th, and then on June 20th starts to back off again. So it could be like, oh, that wasn't a good idea. Let's all get in airplanes fully packed again. It could be very comically, unfortunately, literal with astrology, guys. It's like, sometimes it looks a cigar is just a cigar. It looks like what it is. So yeah, thanks Omar for focusing on the proximate transits like that too. That's a really important thing to look at, and the characters in the stage of the collective right now. Hey, I'm going to move over to Dan and say, hey, what's up? You want to share some of your thoughts as a Hellenistic astrologer? Dan's a kicker. Like, the guy has his own Facebook page all about current events through the lens of astrology. And I always laugh when you post something down. It's always so accurate.
Yeah, I just have that as my way to try to keep up with the current transits and try to pay attention to what's going on in the world. I was thinking that it's interesting that we're having this Zoom meeting, and in a few days, and like this weekend, we're having a Virgo full moon. Because what I remember, at least where I live, was around the time we had a Virgo full moon in March last year. That was when, like, people were talking about the coronavirus, but when that Virgo full moon happened, it was like reality had set in and everybody was hitting the stores and gathering supplies, and it was like the kind of the mad rush, and the toilet paper is disappearing and stuff. I kind of was thinking that's like, it's kind of funny for a Virgo full moon and like that, those kinds of dynamics, right? But what was happening around that time is you had Mars. I mean, you were mentioning Mars, Lori, and Mars is a good one to use because Mars stands for things like injuries, infections. Its joy is in Hellenistic astrology, has joy in the 6th house because that's rules health problems and stuff like that. So I think it's a safe bet to use Mars as a significator for like an infection or an outbreak. So Mars had come into Capricorn and was there with the South Node and Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto. Now, and then there's certain things about this. I like what Omar was saying about watching Jupiter and Saturn. And there's one thing that, like, I've been paying attention to Jupiter, especially as a Hellenistic astrologer, putting a bit more emphasis on the traditional dignity system, because to me, it seemed pretty fitting that all this happened while Jupiter was basically getting its ass kicked in Capricorn, because Jupiter does not do well. It's in its fall in Capricorn, and it's there with Saturn and Pluto and the South Node, just all kind of ganging up on Jupiter and Mars even at that point in time. And then what we saw happen over the course of a few months there was that Mars moved through Capricorn, moved through Aquarius, and so on. And then when it hit Aries, it just like we had the retrograde that lasted forever. Do you guys remember that? How we just had Mars in Aries for like half a year last year? And I mean, I also agree with the Saturn Pluto thing, and I've been reading Rick Tarnas's book, which I recommend, Cosmos and Psyche, because he talks about those outer planets and big historical things that happen around them. But what I thought was interesting as a Hellenistic astrologer, if I'm forgetting about the outer planets for a second, like, I mean, there was a lot of talk around that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, which perfected around winter solstice. But that whole year of 2020, like, I'd go out for a walk and I would just see, I'm like, oh, well, there it is. There's Jupiter and Saturn. And I'd see, oh, look, there's Mars, right? And I just have this clear, I'm like, you can see this huge square between these planets just going for a walk down the street. And like, what has happened with that retrograde of Mars, it's basically kept that locked in place for a long time. And now we've got Jupiter and Saturn both moved into Aquarius, but then Mars, just moved, they all kind of rotate together, keeping the square pattern, right? So basically what I'm thinking is once you start to see Jupiter move into Pisces, then it's sort of like a kind of more separating out what that big concentration of stuff that happened at the beginning. And not only that, but if you use Jupiter as a traditional ruler for Pisces, you go from the really bad news of Jupiter getting completely ganged up on in Capricorn to now Jupiter is in its own sign. I mean, even if you want to bring in outer planet stuff, you've got Neptune there too, but you've got a well-dignified Jupiter anyways. And I think that's going to come as good news one way or another, to have a nice, well-dignified Jupiter in Pisces. And then, of course, it retrogrades back. So I'm kind of with Omer on this one. I think Jupiter in Pisces is going to be a good thing. I think it's going to retrograde. And I think it's going to come back and share the same sign with Saturn. So it's not going to be like all over and done with yet, but then eventually you can see these things separating. And that's kind of where I'm at with it, is things. And then what you were saying about Mars being under the beams and stuff like that later on to the year, that could apply too. That's kind of the gist of what my take on this is right now anyways.
You know what I like about this idea, though? I mean, I do like Jupiter bounding into Pisces, full of optimism and full of his dignity. But I feel like because he entered into Aquarius with Saturn in the lead, and Saturn's dignified there, or the boss, I think he's on like a dog on a leash. And it's the kind of leash I have when I was walking my friend's dog in Montreal, where it just unspools itself. And then, and then you're like, oh, you're at the end of your leash. Pull you back in. I think Jupiter's going to bound in like May 13th or so when he enters into Pisces. Yeah, running with it. But Saturn's got the leash behind him still. And when that happens, the turnaround, the retrograde, what was the date of the retrograde? I always forget the turnaround. June the 20th, Jupiter stations retrograde at 2 degrees of Pisces. I think it's literally going to be like pulling that dog back on, into reality somehow, into like ground it back into reality. Saturn, let's be serious. Let's be sober-minded about something. I do think that the Mars factor is critical and has been a big story about what has happened, and what people aren't talking about a lot, but I talk about a lot from my channel, is that, Mars fortifying himself for 6 months in Aries, for good or bad, is super strong right now in the sky. And the last time he got a fortification P90X workout program, super smoothie, personal trainer hiatus in Aries, was way the heck back in 1988. And so now he's done it again. And he's really strong, and it kind of gives him a new flavor as he travels the zodiac, even in his invisibility, I would say. So, when he hits, October 30th through to mid-December, he's going to hit Scorpio in the fall. He's also going to hit his return from, the invisibility around, I think, December 21st, depending on the latitude you live in. But I'd also love to know, what the Sabian is, if anyone had a chance to go look at the Kazemi degree of when Mars hits the heart of the sun next, because that could be very telling. And if not, I'll figure it out before we finish. But I guess what I'd say about that is, I think Mars, even invisible, for those 5 months, is still extra strong. I think he's invisible and strong at the same time. I don't think it's a normal Mars invisible that we get when he goes into the heart of the sun. I think this is a different version. That's why I'm a little worried that even though he's out of commission, so to speak, in terms of malefic action, that under the surface, it's almost like, You don't know there's black mold in the walls of your home until you know there's black mold in the walls of your home. And that's my concern with Mars, strong but invisible. Yeah, I'm just going to ask, because we have an astrologer here. Did you have any luck on the Kazemi tea? No? Okay, so I'll go look at it. I'm going to rotate the baton back to Kate, Omar, and Dan to reflect again while I go Google.
Sorry, we're just looking it up. I don't really have too much more to add. I mean, I think we have between the 4 points, I think we hit on a lot of information. I mean, that Mars retrograde, I do think, especially seeing it at the anaretic degree and seeing what happened here in the United States, it's like, you don't want to wrangle, you don't want to wrangle Mars in Aries. Like, you know, it's like, it's almost like, because it was retrograde, it's almost like it like pent up all this anger. And when it hits that 29 degrees and we had to lash out, we had to let all of this steam off, right? And we saw it as they hit our Capitol building. So it was just, again, just fascinating how much you can learn through watching the news and then looking at the aspects, and pretty incredible.
Yeah, so I'm looking at Mars going, almost forming a perfect conjunction with the sun towards the end of September into October. And I'm looking at, you know, there's some significant trines being formed. Well, at least with the North Node, the Sun and Saturn. I'm wondering if that would be sort of that trine with Saturn that Mars has will be a slowing down of the way things are moving, right? Because, you know, Saturn is a sign of restriction. Well, at least in the sense where you're taking more methodical steps to a specific approach. So with Mars forming that trine, that to me shows, okay, all right, you know, Mars is, even in this case, the significator, is sort of like being held back a little bit. All right, you've done your job. You ruined everything already. Saturn is like, all right, let's, because, you know, Saturn is sort of marching behind everyone and just looking and orchestrating things and cleaning up the mess. So once that trine is formed towards the end of September with Mars and Saturn, I think we're going to really see some things slow down. And then, as I mentioned before, when Jupiter and Saturn goes direct again towards the end of October, we'll really start to see progress being made. But until Saturn gets a hold on Mars, I think things are going to start to sort of run amok, because that's what Mars wants to do, just run ahead and destroy. So that's sort of what I'm seeing as well. I don't know if anyone else would agree with that.
Well, I agree that he will run amok if he's not contained, but he is also, in his own way, the Lord of the next 170 years. We got to learn to get along with him in Babylonian tradition. I just want to ask, if I just found it out, it's October the 8th at 15 degrees of Libra when he hits the heart of the sun. I have a Sabian symbol book here, but if anyone doesn't have it handy, I'll go get it. No? I'm going to go grab my Sabian book, and I'm going to, Dan and Omar, just chat away. I'll be right.
I found it online here, actually.
Oh, good.
Well, I was kind of a bit confused though, because the one I was looking at was for like the day before it was at 14 degrees Libra, but I guess it's closer to Kazemi on 15 degrees Libra.
Yes, and you round up for the Sabian, right, Kate?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, so
It's
16.
kind of like, at least the website I've got has the keynote as coming to terms with the inevitability of establishing steady rhythms of social activity. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if there's different.
Is that the 16th degree of the Sabian symbol of Libra, or the 15th?
The 15th.
We're going to go to 16.
We're going to go to 16. Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
we round it up.
I don't know. Well, I'm having trouble finding it now on this website.
That's okay.
So my interpretation for 15, because I've reworked them over the years, so I don't even have the names of what the actual Sabian symbols are, but if I was seeing someone go through this, I would say you're having to find a safe harbor, you're having to assess the work to be done, showing, you know, having to overcome obstacles, having to rebuild, reconstruct. It supports putting things back together.
Right. That makes sense to me. at least at this point, with the trine being formed, with Jupiter as well. I think I missed that at first, but yeah, it's going to be, cleanup time,
Yeah.
So I think with the Sabian symbol, if we get a good grip on it, or a good understanding of it, it'll show us something similar too.
Yeah, so I've got the actual Sabian book, just for the record, one of my books anyway, well rained on in the rain outside my house. If you go to 16 Libra to round up from 15 and change, which is the tradition is to round the Sabians up. And we don't go with just pure 15, then 16 in my book is a boat landing, like the landing where the boat goes, not the boat landing, the thing it lands on, like a dock or something, the boat landing washed away. But the key word in this book, the Sabian symbols, a screen of prophecy, is respite. And the key theme is opportunity and loss.
I found it on the website that I was using, and it's the keynote, or the short version is, after a storm, a boat landing stands in need of reconstruction. That seems like it might be kind of fitting.
Oh, I like that too.
After a storm.
I like that too. Nice. So yes, and this particular write-up does talk about like a respite, a time of like, whew, finally. And it talks about really accepting loss as a signature that it's time to make a change and opening the doors to new opportunity. So maybe that is the beginning of the tide boat that turns at last, and we all go, oh my God, with that last 2 years. Now, this guy Ruman that I love and I studied with, he predicted in March of 2021 this pandemic would still be going today, and he was right. And he's using the Babylonian wisdom tradition. So, a lot of me, included modern astrologers, were like hoping for the best and looking at the best of the best possibilities, trying to like put a happy face on it. I certainly was. I was looking at things like the minor asteroids as hopeful indicators, but the problem with minor asteroids is they're just they're the T's that cross, they're the line that crosses a T and the dot that dots the I. They're not the shakers and movers, they're the devil in the details. And so I totally didn't look at it yet 2 years ago from a Babylonian eye. So one of the things I want to say as astrologers here, all of us and anyone listening to this video on YouTube, look at the sky and ask yourself, like Dan said, what is the sky really doing? Look at it yourself. And, can I see the planet? Is it invisible? Is it rising? Is it in the morning sky? Is it in the evening sky? What is the relationship to the other planets? What star is behind it? Is it a malefic? I think we lose track of the sky and we get stuck on pieces of paper. I'm back to the sky these days. Anyway, any questions from you guys who are listening, or any thoughts? I'd love to take questions and thoughts. And I'm going to end this like sort of official astrology portion, but if you don't mind, I'll keep your questions and thoughts on the YouTube video. So if you don't want to ask a question in public that's going to be displayed on YouTube, then don't ask a question now. This is not about your personal life. We're doing, the big picture. So anyone, and especially T, how about you?
I'm just really glad that we brought up Sabian symbols in this conversation, because it's something that, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. It's something that I haven't looked into quite a bit, but I have heard about it. And so, I'm just glad that it was brought up so that I have some homework to do. But do you recommend a book or a site or something of the nature for me?
Yeah, there's so many websites on it, but Kate seems to be like the queen of Sabian, and I'm just a dabbler. What do you think, Kate?
Yeah, I have the original 360 book, and then what I've done is I've written out every one in like a Word document, and I've added just what those look like in someone's life, right? So like when we're talking about like a literal boat is not going to land on shore in 2021, right? So like, what does that look like in someone's house? So that could be, oh, you went through the California wildfires and now you're having to rebuild, right? You went through a natural disaster. So I start putting in just like what the keywords are, what someone would relate to, and then just over the years doing appointments, and I hear stories and they share, I kind of update them. So it just gives you some very great verbiage to work with and some great examples. And then as I find celebrities that either I really like or celebrities that are in the news, I look up their Sabian symbols and then put their names underneath them. So it gives people something to relate to because, right, a lot of us know celebrities and we can kind of see those big personas.
Do you share that content? Is it like something people can purchase or download from you?
I don't.
Oh, that's something you should be doing. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
It's kind of like the Kate Wynn Sabian symbol cheat sheet, or
I
like,
know. I haven't thought about that.
yeah, it's a great downloadable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now I'm wondering, Kate, for because I'm not very familiar with Sabian symbols, but the sort of the method that you're using to like add context and color to these symbols that you've identified, are you using it based off of the person's sun sign, or which degree are you looking at the time where you're adding context given the story that a client has given you?
Yep. So for every client on the initial intake, I look at their sun, their moon, ascendant, and then I look at their midpoint. And those midpoint Sabian symbols, like, I mean, I read mine. I'm like, holy crap, like I read other people's, and it's like you will know nothing about someone getting on the phone with them, and just reading that midpoint, you get a really nice thumbnail sketch. And then
sun moon midpoint.
And then from there, I'll progress the sun just to see like what energies they're entering. But you can look it up for any planet, but I do think the personal planets are definitely very insightful. But the more that you study them and you kind of know some of those, I'm gonna say scary, like this darker ones, and you see a couple of those in someone's chart, and it really starts to kind of color maybe what some overarching themes are in their life.
Yeah, and I would add to that, like my experience with them, which is limited, but I have used them on and off for 20 years. They're not that useful for someone's midheaven unless they really know the birth time, because the midheaven moves by a degree every 4 minutes. So it's kind of dicey on midheaven and ascendant even, but certainly sun and moon, more likely the birth time is accurate. The sun for sure, the moon, is less reliable. But yeah, those midheaven midpoints, you really want to have somebody like an astrologer standing by when the kid popped out. Yeah. Also, it's great for famous people stuff, and also for like political events, when something big is happening and there's a certain planetary transit that you can look at what's going on, or stationary planets like Jupiter is stationing October the 18th at 22 degrees of Aquarius. I haven't even checked out the Sabian for that, but you can darn well know that that's going to be an important Sabian symbol, because he's stationing to escape the leash of Saturn. He's going to station so he can race into Pisces, and get there in December. So that stationary degree is going to have more significance than most times, for sure.
I have a question. Oh,
yeah, go ahead.
I was wanting to know if this encompassed why certain countries are having a rougher time with the coronavirus and others, if that can explain that, or if it's just more like the internal dynamics of the government.
I think the first thing that comes to mind with that question is the idea that specific planets or signs govern a specific geography on the planet, right? Or on the Earth. So while one country or one region of the world may be doing better because of a favorable aspect to the ruling sign or planet of that country, other countries on the Earth may have a different ruling sign or planet that is adversely aspected, right? So the U.S., we're getting hit hard, right? And I haven't done the due diligence to really look at, what aspects are being formed to the ruling signs for the U.S., or at least the East Coast. I'm willing to bet that it's less favorable than Canada or anywhere else in the world that's really not getting hit as hard with COVID. So that's the first thing that comes to mind for me when I hear that question. I don't know if Lori or Kate, Dan, you have any other things to add?
Oh, I would also say to look into what it's called the Sibley chart for the USA. Basically, there's a technique where it's like it's basically like a birth chart for a country. And so I think that the Sibley chart is for the day they signed the Declaration of Independence. and it's timed so that it has Sag rising. So if I think it's like, what is it, 1776,
Mhm.
4th of July, right? So if you look that up, what you get is you get a stellium of planets in Cancer, right? So if you think about a Cancer stellium, and then when the whole coronavirus thing really kicked off last year, you had the stellium in Capricorn with, you know, Saturn, Jupiter, Pluto, Mars, South Node all opposing where America has the most planets. That's one way you can have a really clear indication of America having a particularly hard time with it. And then you could look at, I don't know what, for each nation, what a reliable chart that people like to use is. I'm not as familiar with looking at the Canada's charts because we're kind of a smaller country, but that's what I would say for America anyways.
And yeah, such a good point, because you know there was an eclipse on the sun of the United States, right? That is not a good thing. That happened in the summer of 2000. That my brain, because like, you know, that's my readings last year. But you know, the U.S. sun is at 14 Cancer against the star Sirius, which is a good star, the dog star. But you know, the U.S. sun was actually eclipsed itself during one of the eclipses in the summer of 2000. It must have been someone remember the eclipse cycle? Was it the solstice eclipse on the 21st that hit the sun? It must have been. It was, of course it would, because the summer solstice, June 21st eclipse impacted the United States sun. So, you know, an eclipse to the sun of a nation is like, you know, not a good thing. Just like my Babylonian teacher, you know, that I've studied with twice. Okay, 2 online courses, but like not just like a you know, 1 workshop. So I don't know where to place him in the hierarchy of instructors, but I do think he's valuable in terms of what he taught me. He did point out that it's never a good thing when the sun gets eclipsed ever during, you know, its birthday. You know, and there was that eclipse at Christmas time, right? And the sun is in the dark of the sky. It's the winter solstice. And so it's really also just for the whole world a daunting time when a sun is getting an eclipse. Not the sun of a person, not the sun, just the sun itself is participating on its birthday, this winter solstice. The solstices are birthdays and height days for the sun. High sun, low sun, no sun, you know. So anyway, I just kind of thought that was an interesting point.
Yeah.
We're all like, oh my God, it's a Christmas eclipse. You know,
I think I'll also add to Dan's point, the birth chart for the US, like the US it's not just finished the Pluto return or is still going through a Pluto return. You know, that's transformation. That's sort of burn it down and build it back up. So you think about that, you know, how many other countries have the same sort of birth of their nation going through a Pluto return right now. So I think it's only fitting that the US is really getting hit hard because there's a lot of things that we're rethinking. I don't know how many of us are from the States, Kate, but we've been doing things pretty fucked up for a long time. So, you know,
We're
right
rewriting
now,
our history.
Right. Yeah. And it's sort of, it's being resurfaced. We're in a transformational time right now. Our Medicare system is just terrible. You know, race relations could be better, to say the least. So we're going through such a huge transformation right now, and COVID has really exacerbated all that, right? And with the Pluto return, it's like, okay, you guys need to start from scratch and really build something new, something better on top of it. So all of that sort of goes to my mind when I think about, you know, your question, Cynthia, which was a good one.
I agree. And you can even break that down by city and state, because I was looking at, you know, Las Vegas, and I have a chart for Las Vegas just because I'm here. I have a lot of entertainer friends. Like, when is Las Vegas going to get back up and running? And so I even study individual city charts just to see why. In, you know, last March, I was saying Las Vegas will probably take a little bit longer to bounce back. And I can't remember what it was at this point now, but I just remember I was concerned because this is my hometown and there's a lot of entertainers here that really rely on the tourism.
Mm.
And if I can ask a question, kind of a reflective question on some level, because the image that I was seeing initially is the spiral energy, and it was just that sense of that tornado. So as you guys mentioned, like coming out of the storm, the dissipating of the storm, having to go back and kind of pick up those pieces. but the image that was coming was like, again, that person, like say coming out, but having to go against the wall. And to me, it was just that more that finding that balance, that center, almost like that masculine, which to me, is it reflecting Mars, and where's the Venus correlation to that? If normally Venus would be a correlation with the masculine and feminine, I'm not sure. That's one part. And then it also made me think of when Dan was saying the outer and the inner planets, like, is that there's something about the balancing and center point that's coming in. And as I kind of like, watching the spiral go out, it then was this platform, which I think Lori kind of mentioned, maybe it's that air energy, stepping into that air energy. And for me, the image that came was like, say, the chart as that platform, but there was something about the 3rd, 6th, and 9th houses. So I'm just curious about that balanced energy. Like, is it Mars and Venus kind of balancing, or the outer inner planets, you guys would say? And then that platform energy when we're coming out, what the 3, 6, 9 houses would reflect.
I just want to address the Aries thing, and then the 3, 6, 9, I'll let someone else grab it. It's interesting that Mars rose against Libra tropical in his heliacal rising after he left the heart of the sun, the start of the COVID virus in terms of the Babylonian narrative. That happened in the fall of 2019. And that Venus is going to a star point in the heart of the sun in Mars's sign. So it's a reciprocity on March the 25th at 5 degrees of Aries. So, basically Mars started the whole ordeal by like birthing in Venus's sign Libra. And now conversely, the other direction, she's birthing in his sign on March the 25th. So when you talked about Mars and Venus and that polarity, I started to think about, well, maybe that's this weird reciprocity, because she births herself in Aries every 4 years. So she birthed in Aries right now, right? So I just think that's, or will be, on March 25th. She's invisible now in the sky, and she will birth in March 25th. And she'll come out on the other side as the evening star and be visible by the end of April. So some of the goodness that Venus wants to bring us, maybe to balance Mars, is not going to show up maybe visibly until the end of April, but I think that's a good omen anyway. Anyone thought about the houses? Because Carrie's just an intuitive, not an astrologer. Like, she's like, I see those houses 3, 6, and 9 in terms of the pandemic.
Like it had that feeling of like the 3, 6, 9, and then it's like the pause. So that's where when somebody said the retrograde representing that kind of like, there's the 3, 6, 9 houses and then a retrograde, or there's just something there I'm curious about. Yeah.
The only thing I could think of is like the eclipses are happening along that axis, the 3rd and 9th house this year with Gemini and Sagittarius. But besides that, I didn't know maybe how. I can't think of anything off the top of my head of how that would play in.
Yeah, it's hard to say because it's contextual too to whatever we're looking at. Like if we're looking at North America or the US, or certain cities' charts, I mean, there's different ways to appreciate that. Certainly you could sort of look at the fact that 9 is a Dharma house or it's a foreign relations house. And you could look at 3 being a local community house and short-term trips and travel. Well, get our short-term trips and travel back, 3rd house. And we'll get our, big airplane trips back, 9th house. And then 6th house is a house of sickness. And so, yeah, so maybe it's a recovery from sickness, like collective sickness, like not just individually being sick. Dan, what do you think as a Hellenistic astrologer about the houses in the context of the pandemic? Those houses in particular, archetypally even.
Well, I don't know. It seems like a tricky question because I'm not used to going in that kind of intuitive direction with it. Because what I would be thinking is that it would have to, like, it all depends on what you're applying it to. Like, are you applying it to, if you look at the Sibley chart for the states, for example, I think that like the Cancer stellium is in the 8th house, and then they would have a Leo 9th house maybe or something, right? But it all kind of depends on what chart but if you talk about maybe this as archetypal patterns, those houses, they're all, these are cadent houses. So they're kind of like, it represents like the transition. It's kind of about that mutable kind of quality to it. And like I've been trained in a certain way where I don't mix up the signs and the houses so much. But what Kate said about we have eclipses in Sag and Gemini, and I mean, it's funny what you're saying about like the birthdays. I had a lunar eclipse on my birthday this year, which was kind of intense. I mean, I've heard though that a solar eclipse is worse than a lunar one because the lunar eclipse is more, the moon moves so fast. It's more of a fleeting thing, whereas a solar eclipse is more long-term trouble. But it is, yeah, having eclipses on important dates like that can be a sign of for something to be worried about sometimes. But it wasn't that bad though. I survived.
Okay, we're all gonna hold our hands and do a little prayer circle for Dan. How long ago was your birthday?
Oh well, back in December, anyways. They had the lunar eclipse in December
Well, the
or
worst case scenario
November.
is usually the 6 months that follow the solar eclipse. So we shall pray for you. Don't worry, we got your back. You're going to be fine. You're too young for anything too bad to happen. Just a massive shift of some sort. All right, so I have a class with Kepler College, which I just adore, on life purpose astrology. I think it's my last class, so I'm a little late, but that's okay. Everyone else is too. A live class. I'm going to call this a wonderful collaborative meeting of minds. And thank you for all of you astrologers for showing up to really discuss something in, in a time which nobody knows the right answer, but it's fun to speculate, and do our best with it. And thank you for any of the Patreons who showed up to listen. Thank you. And you know what we're going to do, guys? We're going to put all the links in the Patreon platform to all of these astrologers so you can check them out individually and know where to find them. And also, I will be putting this on YouTube with links in the description box to all of their offerings. They're all amazing people. And Kate, by the way, is a feng shui woman as well. Tells you how to look at your home's chi flow. I keep changing my home since I met her. So there's many, many talents in this room. Tiana, thank you for being here. And thank you as well to Dawn and Carrie and Cynthia for showing up to listen tonight. And I appreciate everyone here. And I'm going to go back to school after we finish. So I'll see you guys. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.